12 plantation estates across the Georgia coastal counties fell apart within a single decade, leaving their owners dead, out of money, or running away in shame. Local historians said it was just bad luck, bad crops, sickness, or changes in the economy. But the county records tell a different story, one hidden in auction books, property papers, and court files from 1047 to 1857. Every single estate had bought the same woman, a slave named Celeste, who was sold and re-sold 12 times. Each sale happened just months before a terrible ruin struck her new master. The people who survived spoke of her beauty, her silence, and something else, something they could not quite name. Before we go on with the story of Celeste and the 12 estates that fell, if stories of forgotten American history interest you, make sure to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell. We bring you the darkest, most mysterious tales hidden in our nation's past, and please comment below. Tell us what state or city you are listening from. We love knowing where our audience finds these stories. Now, let us discover what really happened to those 12 plantations. The auction houses of Savannah rarely saw such strange events, but the sale of Celeste in March 1847 started events that would become a whispered legend among Georgia's rich planters. The coastal counties of Georgia in the late 1840s were the top of American cotton wealth. From Chatham County south through Glynn and Camden, huge plantations stretched along the rivers and marshes. Their big white houses could be seen from steamboats. The estates competed not just in land size or crops, but in showing off their fancy things, imported furniture, educated children sent to schools in Charleston or Philadelphia, and the quality of their enslaved workers. Savannah's auction houses on Bryan Street did business with cold speed. The spring sales of 1847 brought buyers from all over the coast, men whose names were on bank boards and shipping lists. They came looking for field workers, skilled craftsmen, or house servants to staff their growing farms. Celeste arrived at the Savannah Exchange on March 14, 1847, sent by the estate of a Charleston merchant who had died. The papers listed her as 22 years old, trained in house service, with notes about her looks that were strange for such papers. The auctioneer, a man named Hiram Stokes, who had done thousands of sales, would later tell his wife that he had never seen the buying room react that way to any person. She stood on the platform in a simple gray dress, her hands folded, her eyes looking at some far-off point past the crowd. Men who went to auctions every week, who prided themselves on judging human property smartly, found themselves unable to look away. Her face had a rare look that did not fit the usual groups of the trade. Her skin was the color of coffee with milk. Her face was built with perfect shape. Her way of standing showed neither fight nor giving up, but rather a deep emptiness, as if she existed somewhere outside the room itself. The bidding started at $400. Within minutes it went over $2,000. Colonel Marcus Fenwick of Fenwick Hall, one of the biggest rice plantations in Chatham County, bought her for $300. This was a price that made men gasp, even men used to such deals. Fenwick Hall sat 15 miles south of Savannah, a three-story mansion looking over the Vernon River. Marcus Fenwick had gotten the property from his father and made it bigger through smart cotton investments. At 48, he was a widower, his wife having died while giving birth 5 years before, along with the baby. His home included his 2 living children, a daughter named Virginia aged 17, and a son, Marcus Jr., aged 15, along with about 200 enslaved workers and many overseers. The colonel's purchase of Celeste made his friends raise their eyebrows, not for the price. Men of his rank often bought expensive house servants, but for what it suggested about his needs. A widower of good standing usually married again within 2 years. Fenwick had not. Buying such a woman at such a price carried meanings that polite society preferred not to look at too closely. Celeste arrived at Fenwick Hall in late March. As the flowers began blooming along the driveway, the head housekeeper, a free woman of color named Mrs. Delacroix, who had run the house for 20 years, wrote down Celeste's arrival in her careful book. The note said the date, the price, and one thought. Girl arrived, put in East Wing rooms, very quiet. For the first month, Celeste's job stayed the same as any house servant, helping with laundry, serving food, and cleaning the colonel's private rooms. Virginia Fenwick, who kept a detailed diary, wrote of her, "Father's new girl is quite good looking, but strange. She moves through the house like a ghost. I have never heard her speak more than needed. The other servants stay away from her. The colonel himself seemed happy with his purchase. He ate well, slept soundly, and took care of farm business with his usual speed." His overseer, a Scotsman named Duncan McLaren, reported that the spring planting went without trouble. The rice fields flooded on time. The cotton fields showed good early growth. On the evening of May 8, 1847, Colonel Fenwick ate dinner alone in his study, a habit he started since his wife's death. The meal was roasted bird, spring greens from the garden, and a bottle of wine from his cellar. Celeste served him as she had for the past 6 weeks, moving silently between the dining room and kitchen. Mrs. Delacroix, whose room was next to the kitchen, later told police that nothing seemed strange that night. The colonel sent the staff away at 9:00, as was his habit. Celeste stayed to clear the study. The screaming began at 10. Virginia Fenwick, reading in her bedroom on the second floor, heard her father's voice, not words, but sounds of pain that made her drop her book and run into the hall. Her brother came out of his own room, his face pale. The sounds came from below, from the study. By the time they ran down the stairs, the house was awake. Mrs. Delacroix reached the study first, followed by McLaren, who had been looking at books in the overseer's cottage. They found the colonel on the floor, shaking. His face had turned dark purple, his hands scratching at his throat, and foam was on his lips. The doctor arrived from Savannah at sunrise. It was too late. Colonel Fenwick died at 4:17 a.m., 7 hours after the symptoms started. The doctor, Dr. Samuel Pritchard, looked at the body and gave his opinion: apoplexy or a sudden stroke, possibly started by a bad meal. Such deaths happened often in the coastal low country, where the warm weather helped bad things grow in food. Celeste stood in the hallway during the doctor's check, her face unchanged. When asked by McLaren, she explained in her soft, calm voice that the colonel had eaten the same meal as always, made by the cook as usual. She had only served it. She knew nothing of what happened after. The investigation lasted 3 days. Dr. Pritchard found no clear signs of poison, no smell of almonds, no strange color changes beyond what death causes. The house staff said the evening had gone normally. The cook, an enslaved woman named Betty, who had made meals at Fenwick Hall for 30 years, cried while saying she had done nothing different, nothing wrong. The colonel was buried in the family plot on May 12th. His will, read by his lawyer, showed an estate worth about $80,000, a large amount, but not as large as it should have been. The rice crop had done poorly the season before. Several investments in Savannah shipping had failed. The property had debts that Marcus Jr., now the head of the house at 15, could not manage. The estate went into bankruptcy. The court picked a trustee to manage the sale. Within 3 months, Fenwick Hall would be sold at auction, its things scattered, and its enslaved workers divided among people he owed money to. On June 3, 1847, Celeste appeared on the auction block in Savannah again. The second sale drew less attention than the first. Estate sales happened often, and slaves from bankrupt farms often sold for less money. Yet several men who had been at the March auction noticed her return. One of them, a planter named Theodore Calhoun, who owned big lands in Liberty County, made the winning bid at $1,400. Calhoun's plantation, Liberty Oaks, focused on Sea Island cotton, the long kind that sold for high prices. Theodore Calhoun had built his wealth through careful management and smart marriages. His first wife had died of fever. His second wife, Margaret, 20 years younger than him, had given him a son, but seemed always unhappy with farm life. Celeste's arrival at Liberty Oaks in mid-June happened at the same time as the cotton's most important growing period. She was given house jobs under the watch of Margaret Calhoun, who kept strict control over her house staff. The mistress of Liberty Oaks kept Celeste close, too close. According to other servants, she insisted that Celeste stay with her during her afternoon rest, help her dress, and brush her hair before bed. Theodore Calhoun paid little attention to the new purchase. His worries were about the cotton fields and growing anger with his overseers over work rules. The 1847 season had brought surprise challenges: a late spring frost, bug problems, and constant flooding in the lower fields. Margaret Calhoun's diary, found decades later in a Charleston archive, gives a look into those months. Her writing from July and August 1847 grew more and more strange. July 14th, Theodore spends every evening in his study. I am left alone with only Celeste for company. She does not speak unless spoken to, yet I find myself talking to her, telling her things I would not tell my own sister. August 2nd, had the most strange dream. Celeste stood at the foot of my bed, watching me. When I woke, she was there exactly as I dreamed, holding my morning tea. She claimed she just entered. I don't believe her. August 19th, Theodore has gotten sick. The doctor says it is the coastal fever, but I have never seen fever like this. He refuses to eat, barely drinks, says the food tastes wrong, like metal. Theodore Calhoun died on September 7th, 1847, after a 2-week sickness marked by getting weaker, losing his appetite, and his organs failing. Dr. Pritchard, the same doctor who had helped Colonel Fenwick, noted the similarities, but said they were from the common diseases of the coast. 2 important men dying within 4 months was sad, but not unheard of. The events after, however, were more dramatic than the death itself. Margaret Calhoun, looking through her husband's papers, found that Liberty Oaks was out of money. Theodore had borrowed heavily against future cotton crops. The 1847 crop, damaged by weather and bugs, would not cover his debts. The plantation faced being taken by the bank, but the money trouble was small compared to what the estate lawyer found. Theodore Calhoun had recently changed his will. The changes, made just 3 weeks before his death, gave away big assets away from Margaret and toward distant relatives and business partners. Margaret fought the will in court, claiming her husband had not been in his right mind. The legal fight would drag on for months, using up what was left of the estate's value. Celeste was sold again on October 22, 1847, this time at a private sale set up by the estate managers. The buyer, James Hartwell of Bryan County, paid $900. 2 estates, 2 deaths, and 1 woman present at both. Coincidence? The courts thought so, but the pattern was only beginning to show. If you are as interested as we are, hit that like button and leave a comment with your theory. Could one woman truly be connected to such total ruin? Let's continue. The whispers began in Savannah's business places and clubs that winter. Men who tracked such things, lawyers, auctioneers, agents who handled plantation accounts, noticed the pattern forming, not openly and not in words that would ask for a police check, but in the way rumors spread through communities built on gossip and suspicion. That girl from the Fenwick sale, one might say over a drink. Saw her at auction again, 3rd time this year, heard Hartwell bought her. He won't get his money's worth, never does with those fancy house servants. Hartwell might not be as smart as he thinks. Remember Fenwick? Remember Calhoun? James Hartwell's plantation, Hartwell Manor, represented old Georgia money, land given way back in the colonial period, wealth built over generations. James himself, at 61, was the perfect image of a fatherly planter, Methodist in faith, moderate in politics, known for treating his workers fairly well. He bought Celeste not for himself, but for his wife Catherine, who had been asking for more house help. Catherine Hartwell, 58, ran her house with the exactness of an army leader. She interviewed Celeste personally before saying yes to the purchase, asking questions about her past homes, her skills, her mood. Celeste's answers, soft and respectful, satisfied the mistress of Hartwell Manor. The winter of 1847-48 passed quietly. Celeste did her jobs without complaint. The Hartwells had guests for Christmas, hosting a party that drew families from 3 counties. Witnesses later remembered seeing Celeste serving punch, moving through the crowded rooms, getting admiring looks from several young men, but keeping her usual silence. January brought the first sign of trouble. Catherine Hartwell, always healthy, got bad headaches, then tiredness, then sickness that no medicine could fix. Dr. Pritchard called from Savannah, said it was nervous exhaustion and ordered rest and medicine. The symptoms got worse. By February, Catherine could barely leave her bed. She complained of numbness in her hands and feet, of a burning feeling in her stomach, of nightmares so real she woke up screaming. James Hartwell, desperate, brought in specialists from Charleston and Augusta. They offered different ideas: nervous disorder, hidden lung disease, a tumor in the stomach. Catherine Hartwell died on March 3, 1848, almost exactly 1 year after Celeste's first sale. The cause of death, as written by Dr. Pritchard, was failure of the vital organs consistent with advanced nervous disease. James Hartwell, full of grief, pulled away from social life. His cotton agent in Savannah, began noticing strange things in the plantation: accounts missing, shipments, unpaid debts, differences between reported crops and actual sales. A check of the books showed stealing by Hartwell's overseer, who had been taking money for years. The overseer ran to Texas before he could be arrested. The plantation, already struggling with debt from Catherine's medical bills, faced ruin. James Hartwell suffered what his doctor called a crisis of sadness. On April 10, 1848, he was found in his study, having taken a deadly dose of liquid opium. The estate sale happened in May. Celeste appeared on the block for the fourth time. By the summer of 1848, the pattern had become impossible to ignore, at least for those paying attention. 3 estates ruined, 3 owners dead, 1 woman sold and re-sold at each place. Yet the legal system, built on rules and proof, found no reason for investigation. Slaves changed hands constantly. Plantations failed regularly. Death was common in the sickness-prone coastal lowlands, but in the informal networks where planters' wives swapped news and letters, at church socials, during visits, Celeste's name began appearing more often. Not in blaming terms, which would have invited scandal and legal trouble, but in careful warnings disguised as practical advice. I heard Trentham Place bought that girl from the Hartwell estate. Such a shame about James and Catherine. The coastal fever is very bad this year. 4 times sold in 15 months. That is unusual, isn't it? Though I suppose there is always an explanation. My husband saw her at the Bryan Street auction house again. Beautiful, certainly, but there is something about the eyes. Empty, they say, like looking into a deep well. The 4th buyer, William Trentham of McIntosh County, dismissed such talk as silly superstition. A legislated man who thought himself above local beliefs, he bought Celeste in June 1848 for $700, a bargain he thought for such a well-trained servant. His wife had recently died in childbirth, leaving him with 3 young children who needed watching. Celeste took the role of nursemaid at the Trentham estate. The children, aged 7, 5, and 3, at first feared her silence, but she proved patient and able. She fed them, dressed them, told them stories in her soft, quiet voice. The oldest child, William Jr., would later remember that her stories were always about patience. Animals who waited for the right moment, seeds that lay sleeping through winter, rivers that slowly cut through stone. William Trentham Sr. began having money problems within 2 months of Celeste's arrival. His cotton agent in Savannah found mistakes in the accounts. Shipments went missing. Buyers claimed they never received promised deliveries. Trentham's overseer insisted the cotton had been shipped properly, but the papers told a different story. In October 1848, a fire swept through Trentham's main cotton barn, destroying 3/4 of the year's crop. The local sheriff investigated and found signs suggesting arson, rags soaked in lamp oil hidden beneath loose floorboards, but the overseer had run away the night of the fire, and no other suspects appeared. Trentham, facing bankruptcy, began drinking heavily. His behavior became wild. He accused his slaves of plotting, his agent of theft, his late wife's family of plotting against him. On Christmas Eve 1848, he rode his horse into the swamps south of his plantation and did not return. They found his body 3 days later, drowned in 4 feet of water, his horse eating grass peacefully nearby. The estate sale in February 1849 included Celeste as lot number 37. She sold for $500 to a group of 3 planters who jointly owned a rice farm in Camden County. The group arrangement was an unusual business structure. 3 men, Thomas Beaumont, Richard Howell, and Samuel Yates, had pooled money to buy a large rice plantation along the Satilla River. They shared ownership, divided profits, and made decisions together. Their joint purchase of Celeste was meant to staff the main plantation house, which all 3 families visited regularly. The arrangement proved terrible from the start. Beaumont and Howell began fighting over management decisions within weeks of Celeste's arrival. Yates, caught between them, grew more and more quiet. By summer 1849, the partnership had turned into bitter legal fights. Each man accused the others of bad management, theft, or damage. The rice crop failed that season, flooded by unusual summer rains that broke the carefully kept walls. An investigation suggested the walls had been broken on purpose, but no proof pointed to any specific person. The 3 partners blamed each other. In September 1849, Thomas Beaumont was killed when his carriage flipped over on the road between Savannah and his plantation. The accident happened in broad daylight on a good road. The driver, who survived, claimed the horses had suddenly gotten scared, though nothing visible had frightened them. Richard Howell died of fever 3 weeks later. Samuel Yates, the surviving partner, immediately asked the court to end the partnership. He sold his share of the plantation at a loss and moved his family to Augusta, telling friends he wanted nothing more to do with coastal rice farming. The plantation went to auction in November 1849. Celeste was sold separately. Her price now dropped to $300. Her 6th buyer, Edmund Grayson of Glynn County, was a bachelor who ran a small but profitable Sea Island cotton farm. 6 plantations, 6 owners destroyed, and we are only halfway through this nightmare. Just when we thought we had seen the worst, the horror in Georgia's coastal counties gets worse. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Edmund Grayson considered himself too logical for superstition. When his agent in Savannah mentioned the rumors around Celeste, Grayson laughed them off as the wild imagination of bored plantation wives. He bought her in December 1849, specifically to prove that a well-run business had nothing to fear from gossip. His confidence lasted exactly 4 months. The winter of 1849-50 began normally at Grayson's plantation, a modest 300-acre farm called Palmetto Grove. Grayson lived alone, except for his enslaved workforce of 43 people and an overseer named Jacob Turner. He prided himself on being efficient, keeping perfect records of every expense and harvest amount. Celeste's jobs at Palmetto Grove were different from her past places. With no wife or children to help, she worked mainly as Grayson's personal servant, cleaning his rooms, serving his meals, managing the house supplies. Turner, the overseer, noted in his weekly reports that she did her tasks well enough, but added a strange note: the slaves avoid her. When she enters the living quarters, conversation stops. Grayson dismissed this as meaningless. Field slaves often disliked house servants, seeing them as privileged helpers of the master. But Turner's reports grew more worrying through January and February. Tools went missing from the workshops. A storage barn's lock was found broken, though nothing seemed stolen. 3 slaves tried to run away, unusual for Palmetto Grove. which had never had escape attempts in Grayson's 10 years of ownership. In March 1850, Grayson began feeling strange symptoms, not sickness exactly, but a growing sense of unease. He had trouble sleeping. When he did sleep, nightmares woke him. Dreams of drowning, of not being able to breathe, of being buried alive. He started double, checking locks, convinced someone was entering his room at night. His appetite got small. Food tasted wrong to him, though Turner and the cook insisted nothing had changed in the kitchen. By April, Grayson's paranoia had become obvious to everyone on the plantation. He accused Turner of stealing. He claimed the slaves were plotting a rebellion. He began carrying a loaded gun at all times, even inside the house. His letters to his agent in Savannah grew more and more wild, filled with off-topic thoughts and sudden accusations. On April 19, 1850, Jacob Turner was found dead in his cottage, killed by a single gunshot wound. Grayson insisted he had shot the overseer in self-defense, claiming Turner had attacked him. The local sheriff, investigating the scene, found no sign of a fight. Turner's gun remained in its holder. The fatal shot had hit him from behind. The sheriff arrested Grayson and took him to the county jail. At trial, Grayson's lawyer argued temporary insanity caused by being alone and stressed. Witnesses spoke of his declining mental state over the past weeks. The prosecutor, however, showed proof suggesting planned murder. Grayson's increasingly angry letters about Turner, his accusations of theft that no odd it supported, his claims of plotting that no proof backed up. The jury talked for 6 hours before finding Grayson guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years at the state prison in Milledgeville. His property, including his enslaved workers, was sold to cover legal costs and payment to Turner's widow. Celeste appeared at auction in Savannah on June 12, 1850, selling for $200 to a man named Henry Drayton. The price had dropped a lot from $300 3 years earlier to a small part of that amount. The auction house records from June 1850 reveal why. Hiram Stokes, the auctioneer who had done Celeste's first sale, included a strange note beside her listing, not openly warning away buyers, which would have been illegal, but providing a detailed purchase history that any smart observer would find troubling. Henry Drayton either didn't notice or didn't care. A recent widower, desperate for house help, he bought Celeste to care for his old mother and manage his home in Liberty County. Drayton's plantation, called Riverbend, sat along a very lonely stretch of the Midway River. The main house, a 2-story building dating to the 1790s, had fallen into bad shape since the death of Drayton's wife 2 years earlier. His mother, Adelaide, 73 and getting weaker, lived in an upstairs bedroom, rarely coming down to the main floor. Celeste took over care of Adelaide Drayton in late June 1850. The arrangement seemed to suit everyone. The old woman liked having a skilled nurse. Henry could focus on farm business, and Celeste did her duties with her usual speed. Then Adelaide began talking. The other servants, asked later, reported that Mrs. Adelaide had always been talkative, prone to long stories about the old days, but in July and August her talk took on a different quality. She began telling secrets to Celeste, family secrets, debts hidden from lenders, cheating covered up, a child born out of marriage and given away, property stolen from a dead neighbor. Henry Drayton noticed his mother's loose tongue and tried to limit Celeste's time with her. But Adelaide had grown dependent on her nurse and refused to allow anyone else to help her. The old woman's revealings continued, growing more detailed and damaging. She spoke of her late husband's part in smuggling deals during the 1820s. She mentioned her son's fake shipping papers. She described in detail how the Drayton family had gotten their first land through fake claims that kicked out a Creek family. In September, Adelaide Drayton died peacefully in her sleep. A natural death for a woman of 73. But at the funeral, attended by 3 neighboring families, rumors of her deathbed confessions had already spread. By October, Henry Drayton found himself facing questions from the county clerk about land titles. A tax agent from Savannah began looking into his shipping records. The checking got stronger through November. Drayton's cotton agent, alarmed by the growing proof of fraud, cut their business ties. Banks refused loans. Buyers backed out of contracts. On December 8, 1850, the county sheriff arrived at Riverbend with a warrant for Drayton's arrest on charges of customs fraud and property theft. Drayton ran away before the arrest could happen. His plantation was taken by the county to cover fines and repayment. The property sold at auction in January 1851. Celeste, Lot 42 in the estate sale, brought $150 from her 8th buyer. By 1851, the coastal planter community had split into 2 camps regarding Celeste. The first group, made of older, more traditional families, viewed the whole matter as tragic coincidence, the natural result of bad management, bad luck, and the general money swings of plantation farming. The second group, more numerous but less powerful, believed something darker was at work. The split played out in sitting rooms and gentlemen's clubs across Savannah. At the Planters' Bank on Bay Street, men who had once done business with easy friendliness now eyed each other with suspicion. Those who had bought slaves from estates where Celeste had lived found themselves facing subtle social exclusion. Their wives received fewer invitations. Their daughters were passed over for good marriages. No one stated the reason openly, but the meaning was clear. Association with the cursed sales carried a stain. The argument reached its peak in March 1851 when the Savannah Agricultural Society held its annual meeting. The society, made up of the region's most important planters, had gathered to discuss crop rotation methods and new cotton types. But during the social hour following the formal talks, the conversation inevitably turned to Celeste. Colonel Harrison Merriweather, a rice planter whose family had held land in South Carolina since 1690, stood before the gathered men and delivered what amounted to a public rejection of the rumors. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the meeting hall, "we are educated men, not superstitious field hands. We deal in facts, in books, in the logical management of farm businesses. The idea that a single slave woman could cause the collapse of many plantations is silly on its face. These estates failed due to poor watching, too much debt, and the built-in risks of our business, nothing more." His speech drew nodding heads from the older members, but a younger planter named William Sutherland stood to answer. Sutherland, whose neighbor had been the late David Crawford, spoke with barely hidden frustration. "Colonel Merriweather, with respect, you speak from the safety of South Carolina, where this woman has never set foot. Those of us in the Georgia coastal counties have watched a pattern unfold that defies reasonable explanation. 7 estates in 4 years, sir, 7. The mathematical chance of such grouping is very small. The room broke out in competing voices. Men shouted across tables, their usual manners abandoned. The society's president, forced to restore order by threatening to end the meeting, managed to quiet the group. But the damage to the community's unity was done. Planters who had worked together for decades on water projects and politics now viewed each other with mistrust. The problem was lack of proof. No investigation had uncovered proof of wrongdoing. Dr. Pritchard, who had attended several of the dead, found no evidence of poison or violence beyond what might happen naturally. He had kept careful records of each case, and when pressed by colleagues to review them together, he kept his professional judgment. Coastal fever, strokes, accidents, suicide. These are common enough individually. That they group around specific properties might suggest environmental factors, poor water quality, or shared business relationships that expose multiple parties to the same cheating practices. But to suggest planned action by an enslaved woman requires proof I simply do not have. The sheriffs who investigated various incidents found no clear evidence pointing to Celeste. Several had questioned her directly over the years. Each reported the same experience: a quiet, respectful woman who answered questions with soft, spoken clarity, who showed neither guilt nor fight, who seemed almost absent even while physically present. One sheriff, a man named Thomas Crane, who had investigated Edmund Grayson's shooting of his overseer, told colleagues, "I have questioned tough criminals, liars, and killers. I know hiding when I see it. This woman doesn't hide. She simply gives nothing to hold on to. It's like trying to grip smoke." Slaves had no legal standing to testify against whites, and in any case, what testimony could they offer? Several overseers and drivers, when asked informally by their employers, reported that other slaves avoided Celeste. But pressed for specifics, they could provide little. She didn't threaten. She didn't organize. She didn't even speak more than necessary. She simply existed in a way that made others uncomfortable. One driver, a man named Tobias, who had watched Celeste briefly at the Trentham estate, provided the most detailed observation when asked by a curious neighbor. "She works like any field hand when told, does what she's told, but in the quarters at night, people stop talking when she comes near. Not because she demands it, because something in them goes quiet. It's like when a hawk flies over and all the small birds go still. They don't know why they're quiet, they just are." The lawyers and agents who handled the estate sales noted the pattern but could do nothing. Property law required that slaves be sold as assets, and without a crime conviction, no legal way existed to remove Celeste from the market. Several auctioneers began including unofficial warnings with her sale papers, but these remained vague. Long purchase history available upon request. Or buyers should review full past. Hiram Stokes, the auctioneer who had done her first sale, found himself in a moral struggle. By 1851, he had handled 5 of Celeste's 12 sales. His professional name demanded silence. Revealing bad information about goods could expose him to legal trouble from sellers. But his conscience troubled him, particularly after the death of John Mitchell, whose widow had specifically asked Stokes if there were any concerns about the purchase. In May 1851, Stokes visited his minister, Reverend Daniel Whitfield of the Independent Presbyterian Church, seeking advice. The talk, recorded in Whitfield's diary, reveals Stokes's struggle. "Mr. Stokes arrived at my study in clear distress. He explained the situation: a slave woman sold repeatedly, always followed by bad luck to her buyer. He asked whether he had a Christian duty to warn potential buyers. even if doing so broke business rules and possibly law. I advised him that the law and his work duties were clear, but that God's law is higher than man's when innocent lives are at stake. Yet I warned him, without proof of actual wrong, he risked committing the sin of lying. We prayed together, seeking God's guidance. Stokes never solved the problem to his satisfaction. He continued conducting sales, his conscience increasingly heavy, until he retired in 1854. His final journal note regarding Celeste, written after her 12th sale, contained a single sentence: "May God forgive me for what I failed to stop." The 8th through 11th buyers each lasted between 2 and 7 months. The details varied, but the results stayed the same, and with each failure, more details came out about how the collapse happened. John Mitchell of Bryan County, who bought Celeste in January 1851, ran what friends called a tight operation: moderate debt, good crops, strong ties with his agent. His sudden illness in March seemed to come from nowhere. The symptoms began with what he described to his wife as a metal taste in his mouth. Within days, he couldn't keep food down. His skin took on a gray color. Dr. Pritchard, called to the bedside, saw symptoms fitting sudden mineral poisoning, but could find no source. Mitchell's agent, reviewing the plantation accounts during the medical crisis, discovered something Mitchell himself had apparently not known. His overseer had been doing unapproved business on the side, using Mitchell's slaves to clear land for neighbors, pocketing the fees, and fixing the time records to hide the theft. The scheme had been running for at least 2 years. When confronted, the overseer ran, taking with him about $3,000 in stolen money. Mitchell died on March 28, 1851. The funeral drew a large crowd. He had been well liked in the community, but the financial check of his estate revealed regular theft that should have been seen by any careful owner. His widow, forced to sell the plantation to pay debts, made a bitter comment to her sister in a letter: John was not a fool. Yet he was made foolish. He stopped checking the books, stopped watching the overseers, stopped keeping the watch that had built his fortune. It was as if something had distracted him, pulled his attention elsewhere. David Crawford of Camden County, buyer number 9, provided perhaps the clearest example of the pattern. A careful record keeper who kept daily journals of farm operations. Crawford's notes from spring and summer 1851 show a man gradually losing his grip on business basics. His journal from April, shortly after buying Celeste, contains typical entries, detailed notes on planting schedules, weather looks, records of slave health, money math. By May, the entries grow less focused, more deep thinking. He writes at length about the nature of property, the moral problems of slavery, the question of whether souls can be owned even if bodies can be. In June, he stops recording farm business entirely. His entries become personal thoughts, almost random observations. One entry from late June reads, "She watches me at dinner, not openly. She serves the meal, clears the plates, does exactly as told, but there is a quality to her presence that makes me aware of myself, of my actions, of what I stand for. It is like being watched by history itself. I find myself thinking about things I have pushed aside, the families I have split through sales, the children I have traded away from their mothers, the bodies I have worked until they broke. These are simply the workings of farming, I tell myself, but under her look, they become something else." By July, Crawford had stopped doing his daily oversight. His overseer reported to a worried neighbor that Crawford spent hours in his study, writing in his journals, or simply staring into space. The barn fire that destroyed his cotton crop happened on July 23rd. Whether through accident, sabotage, or simple neglect of proper fire safety remained unclear. Crawford made no attempt to rebuild. He sold the property at a loss and moved to Charleston, where he lived in boarding houses supported by family charity until his death in 1856. Robert Bennington of McIntosh County, a rice planter who bought her in October 1851, kept his calm longer than most. A former Army officer who had served in the Seminole Wars, Bennington prided himself on discipline and emotional control. He assigned Celeste to field work, kept her under constant watch, and showed no obvious signs of the mental decay that had affected Crawford. Yet his own letters reveal small changes. In November 1851, he wrote to a cousin in Virginia, "The coastal climate affects men's minds, I think. The constant wet heat, the fever seasons, the loneliness of plantation life. These things wear on one's thinking. I find myself having thoughts I would have dismissed as nonsense during my Army service, not ghost thoughts exactly, but rather a sharp awareness of how shaky our whole system is, how dependent on the cooperation of those we have enslaved, how open we are to their anger." In December, Bennington was found drowned in his own rice field. The water was only 3 feet deep. An experienced planter and former soldier, he should have easily saved himself. The investigation ruled accidental death, suggesting he had slipped on the muddy bank, hit his head, and fallen unconscious into the water. But the overseer who found the body noted something odd. Bennington's boots were untied, his coat unbuttoned, as if he had been preparing to enter the water on purpose. Charles Hartford of Glynn County, the 11th owner who bought Celeste in January 1852, lasted 6 months before his complete mental break. Hartford's fall was seen by his brother Marcus, who lived on a nearby property and visited often. Marcus Hartford later described the steps in a letter to the family doctor. "Charles was always nervous, but perfectly logical when he bought the woman. Within a month I noticed changes, trouble sleeping, loss of appetite, growing fear." He began accusing his slaves of plotting against him, though no proof supported this. He claimed his overseer was stealing, though the books showed no mistakes. By April, he was barely functioning. He would sit for hours staring at nothing, sometimes mumbling about debts and judgment. In May, he became convinced that his late wife, who had died in childbirth 3 years before, was speaking to him, demanding payment for his sins. The final break came in June. "I found him in his cotton fields, naked, screaming at the sky about blood and profit and eternal judgment. The doctor said it was sudden madness. We had no choice but to put him away." Charles Hartford remained in the state asylum in Milledgeville until his death in 1867. The asylum records, looked at decades later by historians studying mental illness of that time, show that he never fully got his mind back. His repeating delusion, as written by his doctors, centered on the belief that he was being judged by those he had enslaved, that their silent witness was slowly driving him mad. With each sale, Celeste's price dropped. By July 1852, when she appeared on the block for the 12th time, her value had fallen to $100, a price suggesting damaged goods or a known problem worker, neither of which her looks or behavior showed. The drop in value itself told a story. The market was pricing in risk that couldn't be legally admitted or formally written down. The 12th buyer, Alexander Vaughn, knew exactly what he was buying. Vaughn represented a different kind of planter, younger, more practical, willing to risk reputation for possible gain. At 32, he belonged to the generation that had grown up in the slave economy, but had also been exposed to Northern schooling and wider ideas. He had spent 2 years at Princeton before returning to Georgia to claim his inheritance. That schooling had given him both doubt towards supernatural reasons and confidence in his ability to logically study complex situations. He attended the July auction specifically to buy Celeste, having studied the pattern of her sales with the cold math of a man who believed he could succeed where others had failed. In the week before the auction, he had visited the offices of lawyers who had handled several of the estate sales, reviewed court records of the deaths and bankruptcies, and talked to 2 of the widows left behind by previous owners. His notes from these checks, kept in his papers, show careful study. Fenwick, aged 48, widower, known to be lonely, bought C at high price, suggesting emotional rather than business reason. Death by likely poison, but no proof found. Estate check showed long-term money mismanagement before C's arrival. Conclusion: existing problems possibly made worse but not caused by C. Calhoun out of money, marriage in trouble, bought C during stress period. Death by wasting illness. Discovery after death of will changes and hidden debts. Wife's diary suggests she talked too much to C. Conclusion: family trouble and money chaos already there. Hartwell, old, sad widower. Wife's death by sickness, then money theft by overseer found. Husband suicide. Pattern suggests emotional weakness and poor watching. C present but unclear link. Common factors across all cases: emotional weakness, money mistakes, poor oversight, being socially alone. Idea: C may serve as trigger rather than cause. Buyers ready to fail pick attractive slave to make up for other life problems. Presence of such purchase signals poor judgment to community, invites watching and taking advantage. C herself may simply be witness to inevitable fall. His thinking, as he explained to his agent in Savannah, was simple. 12 estates failed. But was it the woman, or was it the type of men who bought her? Every single buyer was either old, financially unsafe, or emotionally hurt. I am none of those things. I am 32, debt-free, and I have no false ideas about the nature of property. If there is a problem, I will find and remove it. If not, I have bought an asset at 1/20th her original value. Vaughn's Plantation, Blackwater Point, covered 2,000 acres of prime cotton land in Liberty County. He had inherited the property at age 25 and had spent 7 years updating operations, using new farming methods he had learned about in farm journals, and keeping strict financial control. His enslaved workforce numbered over 300. His overseer, a former Army officer named Patrick Sullivan, ran the operation with Army-like exactness, regular inspections, detailed record, keeping, fast punishment for rule, breaking, and careful watching of all plantation work. The 2 men had served together briefly during the Mexican War, where Vaughn had been a lieutenant and Sullivan a sergeant. Their relationship mixed friendship with clear rank understanding. Sullivan respected Vaughn's intelligence and listened to his judgment, but he also felt free to offer frank advice when he believed his employer was making mistakes. When Vaughn said he planned to buy Celeste, Sullivan objected. "Sir, I don't care about cursed stories or superstition, but I do care about patterns. This woman is connected to 12 business failures. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe not. Either way, buying her marks you as either foolish or proud in the eyes of the business community. Your reputation is your credit. Don't risk it for $1. 100-field hand. Vaughn had considered the advice and rejected it. "Patrick, my reputation is built on logical decision-making and successful operations. I will show both by succeeding where others failed. Let them whisper. Actions speak louder than gossip." Celeste arrived at Blackwater Point on July 22, 1852. Vaughn assigned her to work in the fields, a chosen move. He wanted her visible, watched, unable to work in the shadows of house service where previous disasters had happened. Sullivan placed her in a work group of 40 slaves under the direct watch of a driver named Isaac, a man known for his alertness and total loyalty to plantation management. Isaac received specific instructions. Celeste was never to be alone. She was to be walked to and from the fields. Any change from assigned tasks was to be reported immediately. Any talk with other slaves was to be noted. Isaac, who had served as driver for 8 years and had never failed in his duties, accepted the assignment without question. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Celeste picked cotton alongside the other workers. She worked from dawn to dusk under Isaac's watch, kept adequate, though not special speed, returned to the cabins at night, and spoke to no one beyond needed answers to direct questions. She ate her food, slept in her assigned cabin, and showed no signs of strange behavior. Vaughn, watching from the main house or riding through the fields on his daily checks, began to believe his guess had been correct. The previous owners had been weak or foolish, and the pattern of disasters had been nothing more than statistical grouping combined with poor management. He noted in his journal, 3 weeks with no incident. Sea works adequately. Sullivan's precautions seem too much but cost little to keep. Beginning to believe the entire matter was made up by superstitious minds unable to accept blame for their own failures. Then, on the night of August 11th, Isaac reported an event that would prove to be the beginning of Vaughn's education. Isaac had been doing his usual evening rounds of the cabins, a practice Sullivan required of all drivers, ensuring slaves were accounted for and no unapproved movement happened after dark. At about 9:00, he had found Celeste standing near the cotton barn, about 50 yards from her assigned cabin. She wasn't inside the barn, wasn't doing anything obviously wrong, but simply standing there in the moonlight staring at the building. When Isaac questioned her, she had turned to face him with that typical blank look and said only, "Couldn't sleep, needed air." Then she had walked back to the cabins without further explanation. Isaac, following Sullivan's instructions to report any odd things, wrote down the event, unusual for an overseer or driver, but Vaughn had started systematic record, keeping across all plantation work. Sullivan brought the report to Vaughn the next morning. The two men discussed it over breakfast on the main house porch, where they could speak privately. It might be nothing, Sullivan said, spreading butter on a biscuit. But you wanted writing of everything. She was out of bounds after dark with no good reason. Vaughn considered the report. Has Isaac seen her speaking with other slaves, making relationships that might help planned action? No, sir. If anything, she is alone. The other slaves avoid her. Isaac says conversation stops when she approaches the cook fire in the evenings. They are not mean to her, just distant, fear. Isaac doesn't think so. He says it's more like discomfort, like how people move away from someone who is ill, not because they might catch the illness, but because being near it reminds them of their own death. Vaughn made a note in his daily journal, then decided on more watching. Celeste was to be with someone at all times, even within the cabins. Any change from assigned work areas was to be reported immediately. Sullivan started the new rules with his typical speed, telling Isaac and the other drivers the updated needs. For a week, the extra watching produced no new events. Then, on August 19th, a field slave named Daniel collapsed while working. The plantation doctor, a local man named Reynolds, who had a contract to give medical care for Blackwater Point's enslaved people, examined Daniel and found him suffering from bad stomach cramping, vomiting, and a distinct blue-black line along his gums. Symptoms fitting sudden lead poisoning. Lead poisoning was not unheard of on plantations. It could happen from dirty water pipes, poorly made pottery, or paint containing lead. But Reynolds's check raised questions. Daniel's symptoms were sharp, suggesting recent contact with a big dose rather than slow buildup. Moreover, 3 other slaves from the same work group developed milder versions of the same symptoms over the following week. Sullivan led an immediate check of possible sources. The water supply came from a well that had been tested and found clean. The cooking pots were iron and copper, not lead, lined. The slave cabins had no paint. The work group had not been assigned any tasks that would involve lead contact. No painting, no pipe work, no handling of glazed pottery or lead-based mixes. The investigation turned up one curious finding. Daniel and the 3 other sick slaves all ate from a shared pot that received food from the plantation kitchen. The cook, an enslaved woman named Martha, who had made meals at Blackwater Point for 15 years, insisted she had changed nothing in her methods. The food came from the same cellars, was stored in the same pantry, was made in the same pots she had always used. Reynolds, doing his own check at Vaughn's request, found traces of white lead, a paint mix, in the ash dust beneath the cooking pot. Not enough to determine the source, but enough to explain the poisoning. Someone had put lead into the food making, either by dirtying the raw food or by adding it during cooking. Martha, questioned by Sullivan, cried and swore she had done nothing wrong. She had made thousands of meals without incident. She had no access to lead mixes. She had no reason to poison workers whose work she depended on for her own survival. Sullivan, who had known Martha for years, believed her. The kitchen was secured. New rules started for food making with direct watching, and the sick slaves slowly got better. But the event had achieved something big. It created unease among the enslaved workers. If their food could be poisoned, if danger could come from shared pots they all used, then no one was safe. The unity and routine that allowed a large plantation to function began to fray at the edges. On August 25th, Vaughn's prize breeding bull, a valuable animal worth over $500, was found dead in its pen. The bull, a massive creature brought from South Carolina specifically for breeding, had shown no signs of illness the day before. The animal handler, a slave named Jacob who had tended the animal since its arrival, found it dead at dawn when he came to give morning feed. Reynolds, called to look at the body, could find no clear cause of death, no visible wounds, no signs of poison, no proof of disease. The animal simply stopped living. Reynolds's best guess was heart failure, though bulls of that age rarely died of heart issues. The meat was ruled unsafe to eat, and the body was buried. The loss was financial. $500 was a big investment, but also symbolic. A breeding bull was a sign of a plantation's goals and class. Its mysterious death suggested weakness in even the most controlled parts of plantation work. On September 1st, Sullivan found that someone had been messing with the plantation's water barrels. The main house and overseer's cottage drew water from a well, but field slaves received water from large barrels filled daily from the well and moved to the work areas. Sullivan, doing a routine check, noticed a strange smell from one of the barrels, faintly bitter, almost like medicine. He immediately stopped slaves from drinking from that barrel and sent a sample to Reynolds for testing. The doctor identified traces of a substance he couldn't definitely name, but believed might be made from certain plants native to the coast. Not enough to cause serious harm in the watered-down amount found in the barrel, but enough to make anyone who drank from it feel sick and weak. The event suggested planned damage, but no proof pointed to any specific person. The barrels were filled at dawn by a rotating crew of slaves. Dozens of people had access to them throughout the day. Celeste had been near the barrels, but so had 40 other field workers. Isaac reported that she had never been seen adding anything to the water or behaving suspiciously around the barrels. Vaughn, reviewing these 3 incidents together with Sullivan over dinner on September 4th, recognized the pattern forming. "It is death by 1,000 cuts," he said, pushing his plate away, his appetite gone. Nothing big enough to call for outside help or police, but each event eats away trust, creates fear, turns attention away from regular work. The slaves become suspicious of their food and water. I become suspicious of the slaves. Everyone becomes suspicious of everyone. Do you think it is her?" Sullivan asked bluntly. Vaughn waited before answering. "I think she creates a setting where these things become possible, or perhaps more exactly, where they become unavoidable. A plantation runs on routine, on trust, or at least on reliable fear and force. Once that eats away, once people start questioning what they eat and drink, once they start seeing threats in every shadow, the system becomes shaky, and shaky systems find ways to fall apart. So, what do we do?" Vaughn made a decision that several previous owners had likely considered, but never did. He confronted Celeste directly. The meeting happened in Sullivan's office on the morning of September 5th, 1852. The office, located in a building separate from both the main house and the slave cabins, provided privacy for difficult conversations. Vaughn, Sullivan, and Isaac were present along with Celeste, who had been called from the fields. She stood before the 3 men, her dress dusty from field work, her hands folded, her face as blank as always. Vaughn had prepared for this talk, had practiced different ways, had thought about what questions might get through that blank outside. Now facing her directly, he found his carefully planned questioning seemed not enough. He began formally, as if running a legal hearing. "You are aware of the events that have happened over the past 3 weeks. The poisonings, the dead bull, the bad water." Celeste's voice, when she finally spoke, carried that soft, slow quality that all her previous owners had noted. "Yes, sir." "Do you have any knowledge of how these events happened?" "No, sir." "Have you seen anyone messing with food, water, or animals?" "No, sir." Vaughn felt his patience getting thin. The formal way was producing nothing. He changed methods, his voice getting harder. "I have reviewed your sale history, 12 previous owners in 5 years. Every single one of them suffered terrible bad luck. You expect me to believe you know nothing about these patterns?" For the first time, something flickered in Celeste's eyes. Not fear or fight, but something closer to admitting knowledge. "I expect nothing, sir. I go where I am sold. I do what I am told. What happens to the men who buy me is not my doing. Sullivan, standing to Vaughn's right, jumped in. Then explain why disasters follow you. Explain why 12 estates have fallen. Celeste turned her look to Sullivan. When she spoke, her voice remained soft, but the words carried an edge that none of the men had heard before. I don't need to do anything. You do it to yourselves. The room went silent. Vaughn leaned forward in his chair. Explain that statement. Celeste's eyes moved to some point past the men's shoulders, that habit of looking through rather than at her questioners. Every man who bought me saw something he wanted, not a worker, not a servant, something else, and that wanting made them blind. They stopped watching their overseers. They stopped checking their books. They stopped keeping the discipline and watch that kept their businesses making money. They made enemies of their neighbors with their clear goals. They weakened themselves, and their enemies smelled blood. Their overseers stole from them. Their slaves hated them. Their lenders questioned their judgment. I just waited. I always just wait. Sullivan moved to hit her for talking back, but Vaughn held up a hand, stopping him. Vaughn asked another question, his voice carefully controlled. What about the poisonings here at Blackwater Point? The dead bull, the bad water? Are you claiming you had nothing to do with those events? Celeste's face didn't change. Your slaves hate you, not me specifically, all of you. They hate the system you built. They hate that their children can be sold. They hate working from dawn to dark for your profit. They hate having no future but more of the same. I don't need to poison anyone. Some of them will do it themselves. When they see a chance, some of them will break tools or kill animals just to strike back at you in the only way open to them. Your overseer steals from you because he knows you'll never trust him fully, so he takes what he can while he can. Your neighbors wait for you to fail so they can buy your land cheap. I don't create these conditions. They already exist. I am just aware of them. The meaning hung in the air. Vaughn felt a chill run through him despite the warm September morning. What Celeste was describing wasn't supernatural or even particularly mysterious. It was a logical study of the built-in weaknesses in the plantation system itself. She was describing a kind of social engineering, a shaping not of events, but of the sure forces that led to events. Isaac, who had been silent until now, asked a question that surprised both Vaughn and Sullivan. Why, if you are so smart, if you see all this, why haven't you run? Why haven't you poisoned masters directly instead of waiting for everything to fall apart? Celeste turned her attention to Isaac. The first time she had looked directly at any of them. Running gets you caught and killed. Poisoning gets you caught and killed. But watching, waiting, being present while proud men make the mistakes that proud men always make. That keeps me alive. That keeps me moving. Every time an estate falls, I get sold. Every time I get sold, I start the pattern again. I have lasted longer than 12 owners in 5 years. How many field hands can say that? How many survive even 5 years of your tender care? The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Vaughn found himself facing a sudden thought. Celeste wasn't crazy, delusional, or magically powerful. She was coldly, brutally logical. She had found a survival plan within the slave system and used it perfectly. By being bought by weak men, by becoming a visible sign of their weakness and poor judgment, by simply existing as a trigger, she had ensured her own continued survival while watching her owners destroy themselves. Vaughn ordered Celeste removed and locked in the plantation jail, a small brick building used to punish serious rule breaking. As Isaac led her away, Vaughn and Sullivan sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Sullivan spoke. What do we do with her? Vaughn didn't answer immediately. He was thinking through the meaning of what Celeste had revealed. Finally, he said, We need to do a complete check of plantation operations. Everything. Books, overseers, supplies, slaves, neighbors, lenders. If she is right, if the system contains the seeds of its own fall, then we need to find and remove every weakness before they are used. The investigation that followed over the next 2 weeks was the most thorough exam Blackwater Point had ever had. Vaughn and Sullivan reviewed every book entry from the past 3 years. They interviewed every driver and trusted slave about plantation work. They inspected every building, every piece of equipment, every supply store. They met with Vaughn's agent in Savannah to review his business ties. They talked with his lawyer about his legal standing. They even invited a neighboring planter, a man named Robert Weston, who had always been friendly, to provide an outside look at the operation. What they discovered shocked Vaughn, though looking back it shouldn't have. Sullivan had been stealing for at least 18 months. Not large amounts that would trigger immediate finding, but small percentages skimmed from various accounts. Supply purchases raised by 5%, slave clothing budgets padded by 10%, tool buys marked up beyond actual cost. Sullivan had been clever, spreading the theft across multiple budget areas, ensuring no single mistake would be obvious. But the total impact amounted to about $4,000 of missing funds. When confronted with the proof, Sullivan at first denied it, then claimed he deserved the extra pay for his good management, then finally admitted the theft with something close to defiance. "You inherited wealth, Alexander. I earned every dollar I have through blood and sweat. Yes, I took some. Yes, I plan to take more. Was I wrong? By the law, certainly, but by natural justice. I managed this plantation for you while you played gentleman farmer. I made you wealthy. I took percentage for myself." Vaughn felt real pain at the betrayal. Sullivan had been more than an employee. He had been something close to a friend. But the law and business need left no room for feelings. Sullivan was fired, arrested, and taken to court. He served 2 years in the state prison before dying of fever in 1854. The investigation revealed other problems. 2 field slaves, brothers named Samuel and James, confessed to dirtying the water barrel. Not on Celeste's orders, not even with her knowledge, but because they had overheard Sullivan and Vaughn discussing selling them south as punishment for slow work. They had acted out of desperate fear, hoping to cause enough trouble to prevent the sale or at least draw attention to their situation. The dead bull, as best as Reynolds could tell, had indeed died of natural causes, a hidden heart defect that might have killed the animal at any time. Its timing had been coincidental, though its symbolic impact had been real. The lead poisoning remained partly mysterious. The most likely explanation, according to Reynolds, was accidental contact from an old paint storage area near the kitchen, from which white lead powder might have been carried by wind or moved by someone who had been in that area. Martha, the cook, recalled that repairs had been done to the kitchen roof in mid-August, and workers had stored tools near the old paint supplies. The poisoning, while dangerous, was likely unintentional. But the most damning finding came not from the inside check, but from Vaughn's questions in Savannah. His agent, meeting with him privately, revealed something Vaughn had not known. The talk about his purchase of Celeste, the rumors of his plans, had damaged his reputation in the business community. Firms that had previously been eager to handle his cotton were now careful. A bank that had been thinking about giving him a loan for growth had withdrawn the offer. Business partners who had previously sought his partnership on various deals had quietly pulled away. "You are seen as reckless, Alexander," his agent explained, his discomfort obvious. "Buying that woman after what happened to the others, it marked you as either proud or foolish. Successful men in our community don't need to prove themselves by inviting obvious danger. They show careful judgment. By buying her, you suggested you lacked that care." Vaughn pressed for details. Who exactly had changed their view of him? Which banks? Which agents? The list was longer than he had imagined. The damage to his name was real, measurable, and potentially lasting. He had not been poisoned or hurt directly. He had been hurt by his own pride and the ideas others made based on that pride. The mere presence of Celeste, with her famous history, had marked him as someone whose judgment could not be fully trusted. And in a business world built on trust and name, that marking was potentially as destructive as any physical damage. Vaughn spent 3 days considering his choices. He could sell Celeste, passing her to a 13th owner and continuing the pattern. He could work her literally to death, a practice that was not uncommon with troublesome slaves. He could attempt to fix his reputation while keeping her, hoping that successful work would eventually overcome the stain of the purchase. Or he could do something no previous owner had considered. On September 18, 1852, Alexander Vaughn went to Savannah and